Hi, Majesties. Welcome back to the channel. So we're going to have a quick analysis of what is going on right now in Guinea-Bissau. After I got the news of the, successful military takeover in Guinea-Bissau, I briefed you about that. And, it's their election some few days ago. And there are reasons why the military, a fraction of the military decided to take over power and detain the president, okay? If you've been following Guinea-Bissau for some time, you know that the present leader, the present president, his tenure was due since February and he was supposed to step down. And according to information, ECOWAS has sent in some delegates.
The political deadlock in Guinea-Bissau has taken a new turn as tensions grow amid uncertainty over the election timetable. A mission sent by the West African Regional Bloc ECOWAS to mediate between the government and the opposition left the country abruptly following what it called threats by President Umaru Sissoco Embalo to expel it. The political dispute centers on when Embalo's presidential term should end. He took office on 27 February 2020 for a 5-year term after winning an election. Opposition parties say his term should have expired on 27 February 2025 based on constitutional provisions. However, the Supreme Court of Justice ruled that the term will end on 4th September 2025, while President Embalo stated that the presidential and legislative elections would not be held until 30th November. The president had dissolved the country's opposition-dominated parliament in December 2023, 3 days after armed clashes among security forces in the capital, which he described as an attempted coup. He then set legislative elections for November 2024 before postponing them indefinitely, citing logistical and financial difficulties. These developments have heightened tensions in the country, which has a history of military coups. ECOWAS had deployed a mission to Guinea-Bissau last month, together with the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, to help reach a consensus on how to conduct an election this year. The delegation held talks with President Embalo, the opposition and other political actors. However, ECOWAS said in a statement that its team departed the capital Bissau in the early morning of 1st March after President Umaru Sissoco Embalo threatened to expel it. It gave no details of the reasons for the threats. The Guinea-Bissau president, who headed ECOWAS between 2022 and 2023, has not publicly commented on the bloc's allegation of expulsion threats. This comes as ECOWAS faces its biggest existential challenge since its formation in 1975. 3 countries, Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, have recently exited the bloc and formed a confederation known as the Alliance of Sahel States. They accused ECOWAS of leaning towards Western interests, a claim it denies. In recent years, there have been growing anti-West sentiments in West and Central Africa, with several countries cementing relationships with non-Western allies like Turkey and Russia. Amid the political tensions in Guinea-Bissau, President Embalo visited Moscow last week for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin on economic and security partnerships. Guinea-Bissau gained independence from Portugal in 1974. It is rich in bauxite, phosphate, and agriculture, including fisheries.
He threatened the delegates that was sent to him, and this is the same man in 2022-2023 when the Sahel was heated with military takeover. He was pressurizing the Sahel leaders to return power to democracy. That was when he was still the chairperson of ECOWAS. And now we have a situation where it comes to a point where he became a dictator, because when his time was due for him to step down, he refused to step down. And he decided to extend his leadership till November. He promised that he was going to step down in November. He's going to allow for election in November. And then in November came, what we see is this man running again for election. This is the same man who had promised that he was not going to run for election anymore in Guinea-Bissau. And here we are, having him forcing himself on these people and struggling to remain in power. According to information, he had already pronounced himself the winner even before the Electoral Commission could even come out and say, okay, this is the winner or this is the loser. Both him and his opponent had pronounced themselves winner of the election. And when you look into Guinea-Bissau, it's just the same thing that happened in Cote d'Ivoire, the same thing that happened in Cameroon, the same thing that happened in Tanzania was the same thing that was happening in Guinea-Bissau. And if you've been with me for some time, I think I've been telling you here that Africa is sitting on a time bomb. It's just waiting for the time where it's going to explode. The democracy that is practiced in the continent right now is not a democracy that is for the people or by the people. I don't know the type of democracy that is being practiced. And that is why the moment there is a thought or there is a news of military takeover, everybody is happy. There is jubilation in the air. There is celebration. Why? Because people have seen that military leadership can be good in the Sahel. They have seen how the Sahel have evolved for these past few years. And so the moment there is news of military takeover in a place, there is jubilation and happiness. Now, why do you think that people resort to, military leadership is the best? It's because democracy have failed and have failed woefully. So you see what we're saying? You deceive people into voting you to power. Okay, I'm not going to come back the second time. This is the last time I'm going to be here. And these people voted you. When time came for you to step down and allow another people, you extended your reign. And then when time came, when you finally organized the election, you rigged this election and declare yourself winner. Even before the Electoral Commission could declare a winner, you have declared yourself a winner. So it's a trend among these so-called democratic leaders who are gradually becoming tyrants and dictators. So the military that we are scared of are even gradually becoming, better than the civilian leadership or democratic leadership. So the fear of some persons or well-meaning Africans is it's a false military coup. And the belief is that it is this same president who had agitated the military to take over on his behalf, because the opposition party leader was also arrested by the same fraction of military. Top military generals were also arrested by the same faction of military. And still, there are other group of people that are saying, no, this is not a false military coup. It's a legit military coup. People want a change. So there is mixed feelings in the air. Mind you, if you follow the election, according to ECOWAS observers, they had praised the election and had said it's peaceful and it is democratic. And boom, just after that, we hear it that military had taken over. That is to say, because they knew that this was going their way, and some persons would be like, do not believe whatever ECOWAS or African Union say about a leadership or the state of leadership in a particular country in the continent of Africa. Initially, some citizens were thinking that it is the soldiers backed by the government that are, causing chaos the moment they began to hear gunshot here and there. And later on, they discovered that, the president himself was detained by this same faction of military. And that was when it dawned on them that, okay, it's like something else is happening. Like I said, this was a planned coup. And the generals who were loyal to the president also were arrested. And I know there are people who will be scared. I've spoken a lot here about military takeovers in the continent of Africa. We've done a lot of comparison and the good side of it and the bad side of it as well. And I know some of you will be like, there are some military takeovers that you shouldn't pray for. There are some countries you shouldn't wish for military to take over. That is when they know that that particular country military is corrupt. So when the country military is corrupt, then something is wrong. And for this very faction of military to detain generals that are loyal to the president, I think that there is a ray of hope from this very one. Remember, this is the same man who had promised his people that he was going to step down after one tenure. And when time came for him to step down, he extended his rule till November. So he became a dictator from being a democratic leader. And this same man, when November came for him to step down, he decided to run for another tenure. Remember, he promised he was not going to run for the second tenure. He decided to run for another tenure. And before the Electoral Commission could even conclude, about the election, he had already professed himself as the winner, and the opposition party also professed themselves as the winner. So already that is chaos in the air. That is disagreement in the air.
Guinea-Bissau's military announced on Wednesday, November 26th, that it had taken full control of the country, dissolving the government, detaining the president, and suspending the electoral process. The intervention came one day before provisional results were expected from the November 23rd presidential and legislative elections, and it immediately triggered competing explanations about what had unfolded and why. Brigadier General Denis Nchama, speaking on behalf of a group calling itself the High Military Command for the Restoration of National Security and Public Order, appeared on state television to announce the removal of President Umaro Sissoco Embalo. He said the military acted to stop what he described as a plan involving politicians, a well-known drug trafficker, and both domestic and foreign actors, seeking to manipulate the election outcome. Those detained include Embalo, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff General Biagwena Nantan, the Deputy Chief of Staff General Mamadou Touré, and Interior Minister Bocce Kande. Embalo later confirmed his detention in calls to French media outlets, stating that he was arrested around 1 p.m. local time while in his office at the presidential palace. He said force was not used and accused the Army Chief of Staff of leading the operation. A nationwide curfew was announced, media broadcasts were suspended, and all land, sea, and air borders were closed. Gunfire was reported near the presidential palace, the National Electoral Commission, and the Ministry of the Interior for about an hour before ending early in the afternoon. As more information surfaced, civil society groups contested the interpretation of events. The Frente Popular Coalition accused Embalo and senior officers of staging what they described as a simulated coup to stop the publication of results scheduled for November 27th. Results they believe would have confirmed his defeat. They pointed to the fact that Embalo was able to call international media from custody, arguing that such access was inconsistent with a genuine detention. According to the coalition, the plan was allegedly to install new temporary leadership and call fresh elections, allowing Embalo to run again. Opposition candidate Fernando Diaz da Costa stated he won Sunday's vote and was waiting for the Electoral Commission to confirm the results. Former Prime Minister Domingos Simoes Pereira, who was meeting with observers when the unrest began, said Diaz da Costa was uninvolved and remained safe. According to the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, or PAIGC, both Diaz da Costa and Pereira were reportedly detained afterward. The November 23rd election was unprecedented. It marked the first time in Guinea-Bissau's history that the PAIGC, who led the armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism and secured independence in 1974, was absent from the ballot. The Supreme Court ruled that the PAIGC and its candidate, Domingos Simoes Pereira, submitted their documents after the deadline. The Pai Terra Ranca coalition was similarly excluded. After that decision, PAIGC endorsed Fernando Diaz da Costa, a former vice president of the National People's Assembly. Diaz da Costa ran as an independent and was initially seen as a long shot, before emerging as Embalo's main challenger. Political tensions were already high heading into the election. Opposition groups argued that Embalo's mandate expired in February 2025, while the Supreme Court ruled it would extend his mandate to September. He remained in office past both contested deadlines, which several civil society groups characterized as an attempt to consolidate executive power, what they called an institutional coup. In December 2023, Embalo dissolved the opposition-controlled parliament after what his administration called an attempted coup, leaving the country without a legislature and governing by decree. Then, on October 31st of this year, authorities announced the arrest of several senior officers, including the director of the Kumere Military School, for allegedly plotting a coup, underscoring divisions within the armed forces. This reflects a broader pattern. Since independence in 1974, Guinea-Bissau has experienced 4 coups and numerous attempts. No president has completed 2 consecutive terms, and Embalo was attempting to break this pattern by running for re-election. The country has also been identified by the United Nations as a major transit point for cocaine trafficking between Latin America and Europe, an issue the military cited again in its justification for taking control. With both Embalo and his main challenger claiming victory before the Electoral Commission could announce the results, and with the commission itself now sidelined, It remains unclear if the votes cast will ever be officially recognized. Guinea-Bissau now enters another period of uncertainty, with competing accounts of why the coup happened. Whether it was a military intervention to restore order or a staged crisis to prevent an electoral defeat will likely remain contested in the coming days and weeks. How the country will move forward remains to be seen.
Guinea-Bissau just had a military coup. While this is a very tiny country, this is something that could actually affect the whole continent of Africa. Let me explain. So for some quick background, Guinea-Bissau is a West African country that borders Senegal to the north and Guinea to the south. In 2019, the current president, Umaro Sissoko Embalo, was elected in an election that many people consider to have been fraudulent. Embalo, since rising to power, has pursued what many people supposedly say is a non-aligned foreign policy. He's met with Donald Trump, but he's also met, for instance, with Xi Jinping of China and President Putin of Russia. But upon closer inspection, he actually tends to be a lot more pro-Western. So, for instance, half a year after Israel began its genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, he visited Israel, telling them that, quote, Guinea-Bissau and its people are at your side and ready to help you in any way possible. So, a few days ago, Guinea-Bissau had its election. The opposition leader, Fernando Diaz da Costa, claimed to have won. Embalo refused to step down, so when the military came in and arrested him, I was actually quite excited. And, the military, I'm often skeptical about its role in society, but the military actually in Africa has at times pursued a progressive role. For instance, in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, the military in those countries had a coup, took over, and what happened is those governments pursued a very anti-imperialist policy and also engaged in many policies that redistributed the wealth of the country. But with this coup in Guinea-Bissau, things started to get really weird. So yeah, the military arrested Embalo, but they also arrested Da Costa too. And in their speech, the military kept going on and on about, restoring order, but there was no mention, at least from the clips I heard, of, redistributing the wealth, of resisting imperialism, or of getting rid of the current status quo in the country. So with this, some people, such as the opposition organization, the Fronte Populaire, they're already claiming that this is actually kind of like a fake coup, one that's being orchestrated by Embalo so that he can stay in power. Now, there are others who disagree. They claim that younger members of the military are actually frustrated with the status quo and want, a more progressive, anti-imperialist, revolutionary government. Now, one thing seems certain, though, and I think this is the really interesting part in all this, in addition to everything I've just said. The Economic Community of West Africa, this is a group of 10 countries in West Africa, they're not really a big fan of coups. It's likely that they're going to kick Guinea-Bissau out, but the Economic Community of West African States, this is an organization that is often actually quite a tool of imperialism. They often punish any country in the organization that, for instance, turns against the West. And so with Guinea-Bissau removed, this would actually be the 5th country to leave the organization. And the smaller the organization gets, the less power it has, the less relevant it is, and the more likely it is to crumble. So outside Guinea-Bissau, that's why this coup matters, and that's why it could really affect things in the region.
And mind you, when things like this happen, sometimes it's the masses that suffer. And that is why we're saying, fingers crossed, we will still be updating you about situation and what is going on. Of course, we'll be following up this military to see what they really have in mind, the plans that they have for their citizens.